Chapter 496. The bald man took a step back and stared at Angelica. Heavy solemnness tinged his face. On the same side? He asked in an uncertain tone. That's correct. I nodded my head and spoke right away. On the inside I was trying to sort out my thoughts, but what I showed on the outside was an impassive face that held slight traces of contempt. We're on the same side. Let us go unless you want us to resort to force. You've clearly already felt our strength. The three of you are not our match. This part may have been true, but that was not what worried me. What worried me was the possible problems that the trio before me could pose. They may be weaker than the demons, but they were all about the same rank as me. They were no easy opponents. The bald man glanced back and forth between Angelica and me. Honestly, it's hard to believe the fact that you two are on our side. How so? Isn't it obvious? What are the two of you doing here? We've received no reports of anyone coming. That is already the number one cause of concern. And why should we announce our presence? I raised my chin up and looked down on the group, once again activating the effects of the one to add impact to my voice. The trio's expressions stiffened. Do you not know who the demoness before you is? Subjected to such pressure, the trio was unable to answer. Walking next to Angelica, I lowered my head and took a knee. This over here is Countess Angelica von Deux, a directed descendant of the Lust clan, and the matriarch of a major Lust clan sub-branch. Midway through my sentence I almost fumbled with my words. The cringe was too much for me to bear. Unfortunately I had no choice but to continue. Follow my example and pay your respects to the matriarch. Following my cue, Angelica removed the mask from her face, revealing her appearance. The trio stumbled a little bit. This action wasn't voluntary, but in fact due to the bloodline impression that came out from Angelica's body. It had to be noted that Angelica was currently suppressing her bloodline. She didn't want to alert the demons inside the castle. Sweeping her gaze over the trio, Angelica closed her eyes and no longer looked at them. Her demeanor, coupled with her cold exterior, gave her a noble aura. One reminiscent of that of an aristocrat from the old era. I secretly raised my thumb. Great acting, Angelica. Shut up. Angelica crossed her arms and replied in an irritated tone. I've played along with your little games. What do you need me to do now? Lowering my head, I touched the bottom of my chin. Staring at the trio that was slowly recovering from the shock, I shared my thoughts with Angelica. Listen up, Angelica. After thinking for a bit, I came up with 3 different scenarios. The first scenario is the scenario where they believe in our story. A story in which you're a high-ranking demon assigned to overlook the dungeon for a bit and make sure that everything is working correctly. Their story is not bad and there is a chance for them to buy it, but... I paused and shook my head. As I paused, I noticed Angelica looking at me with eyes asking for more. I did as she wished. But what? The key word is chance. Chance. Yeah. I sighed. This scenario can happen, but I don't think it will be very likely. The most likely scenario in my opinion is the second one, the scenario in which they eventually figure out that we're actually pretending to be on their side in order to infiltrate the facility. I was indeed tempered by the idea of infiltrating the place. However, that wasn't part of my plan currently. It just wouldn't work in this scenario. What makes you think things will turn out this way? Angelica asked. There was a hint of doubt in her voice. Resolving her doubts, I continued to explain. From the corner of my eyes I kept track of the trio. Think about it, Angelica. Although the fact that you're a demon can add credibility to our lie, at the end of the day, once the 3 of them manage to recover from the scare we gave them, they are going to realize that we are frauds. Demons weren't stupid. They knew that they could have traitors in their midst. Just because Angelica was a demon, there was no way they would instantly believe that she was on their side. Especially when she showed up out of nowhere without any prior warnings. They'd have to be very arrogant and self-confident to believe that. In all likelihood, the 3 of them will realize this soon, and bring us to the castle in the distance whilst pretending to have bought our story. Once we arrive at the castle, the 3 of them alongside the demons in the castle will come at us all at once and basically kill us. If I had to put it bluntly, we were screwed if this scenario happened. Sounds reasonable. Angelica replied with a short nod, but the middle of her brows was still tightly knit. She eventually voiced her concerns. If that's the case, what do we do now? I tilted my head and looked at her strangely. What do you mean, what should we do? Isn't it obvious? I thought I had made my next course of action fairly obvious by now. Or maybe it was just me. That aside, it didn't seem like my blunt words were very appreciated by Angelica, whose expression darkened a little. "Spit it out," she demanded in a cold tone. I shrugged my shoulders. "The answer is obvious. We play along." Angelica's face froze. A look of realization soon dawned on her. "I understand. I'm glad you do." I smiled in appreciation. The goal was simple. Let them lead the way toward the castle. Since the place was riddled with traps and all sorts of methods designed to hinder our way, I thought that by playing along we could get rid of most of those problems and conserve some energy. So what if they knew that we were coming? In the first place, from the moment we entered the place they were probably already aware of our existence. They just didn't know that Angelica was a demon. A smile threatened to escape from my lips, but I tried my best to hide it. This was especially so since the trio had finally recollected themselves. Glancing at each other, the three of them got on one knee. This was normal etiquette when meeting a titled demon. "Pardon for our rudeness. We hope you will be lenient with us." Without sparing them a glance, Angelica looked into the distance. "There won't be a next time," she then ordered. "Bring me to where those bastards are. I would like to have a word with them." Lifting their heads and staring at each other, their eyes flashed for a brief moment. This did not escape my line of sight. Once again I became even more convinced about my conjectures. Standing up, with an amiable smile on her face, the lady of the group raised her hand. A peculiar scene happened following her action. From the corner of my eyes, I was able to see a small lump of black headed in the lady's direction. Because it was far, I couldn't quite see what it was. However, it wasn't long before I was able to tell what the lump of black was. It was the spiders from before. All of them walked together in unison. My body flinched a little. If there was a bug I hated with all my soul, then it would without be spiders. Is she a beast tamer like Ava? I wondered. I apologize for the earlier disturbance. Getting rid of the net that was around us, the lady smiled seductively my way. Alongside the smile was a small wink. My body shivered uncontrollably. "Shall we get going, handsome?" "What handsome? I'm wearing a mask." Shaking my head, I kept an impassive exterior and ignored her. Taking a step forward, I followed her from behind. Angelica did the same as she walked next to me. Along the way she suddenly asked, "By the way, what about the third option?" "That." I paused for a second. "The third option is basically attack us on the spot. Probably the option that would have been the most troublesome of the others, since we would have essentially been forced to bulldoze our way to the castle and face off against multiple count-ranked demons. By the time we'd arrive, we'd be extremely low on mana. The most up-to-date NOV_skulls are published under for here, lworld.cthom. The journey toward the castle was fairly unobstructed. Just as I had predicted, no monster came our way. Because of how unobstructed our journey was, it didn't take long for us to finally reach the castle. As the castle was too far for me to get a proper look, now that I was moving closer to it, I slowly started to realize how slick and well-designed the castle was. It was nothing compared to Everblood's, which was a lot cruder. Coming to a halt right at the entrance of the castle where a tremendously large door stood, the trio turned around. The first one to speak was the bald individual. "We're here." Pressing his hand on the large door of the castle, the ground started to shake and the door slowly started to open. "Rumble. Rumble. All you have to do now is follow me, Incy." I glanced in Angelica's way, and as though we were perfectly synchronized with each other, our eyes met. Angelica now. Touching the sheath of my sword, a clicking sound rang out. Click. Blood splurted out and a head rolled on the ground. In the meantime, Angelica raised her hand as black threads started to form beneath the feet of the other two. "What the?" Caught off guard, the two were unable to react in time. Taking a step forward, Angelica's body reappeared a couple of inches away from the two. Before they could even retaliate, placing her slender hand on the heads of the duo, the hue coming out from the duo's bodies started to head in Angelica's direction, resulting in their bodies to slowly starting to dry out. The scene looked especially terrifying from behind. Thud, thud. With two low thuds, the mummified bodies of the duo fell to the ground, and Angelica turned to glance at the enormous door. "We're done here, should we enter?" "Wait." Squinting my eyes, I bent down and observed the corpses in front of me. Raising my head to stare at the entrance of the castle, my eyes began to squint. I was wrong. I slowly came to a realization. The three of them did not sign a contract with any of the demons inside of the building. The goal of having them killed here was so that, apart from catching them off guard in the off chance that any one of them was contracted with a demon inside, the demon would suffer tremendous damage upon their death. If that happened, the next few steps would become a lot easier. Unfortunately, it appeared as though I was wrong. Shit. Things became a lot more troublesome. What are you waiting for? Snapping me out of my daze was Angelica's impatient voice. Raising my head to meet her line of sight, I let out an exasperated sigh. Coming. Standing up, I followed Angelica into the castle. Right as I was about to enter the castle, I suddenly felt a slight itch coming from the right side of my head. Raising my head, I scratched. How annoying. Chapter 497. Angelica. Entering the castle, what met my sight was darkness. Tranquility encompassed the surroundings as the area around me was deathly silent. What was most odd about the situation was that I couldn't see what was ahead of me. It felt as though I was inside of a different dimension. One devoid of any sound and light. Angelica. I called out again, my guard on full alert. Yet again I was met with no response. Closing my eyes, I came to a conclusion. This situation was without a doubt something planned by the demons. The clear and regular sound of footsteps echoed through the dark space. A gentle white glow coming out from my body illuminated the area around me. Despite that, I still couldn't see anything. Odd. It came to a stop. There's no way the castle is this long. For the past 10 minutes, I had been walking in a straight line. Having seen the castle from the outside, I knew that it wasn't that long. This only meant one thing. I'm inside of an illusion. Or at least this was what I thought was the most probable scenario. Licking my lips, I fell into thought. Eventually, I sat down cross-legged and closed my eyes. Since this is an illusion, then there's no point in me moving. The fact that I was in an illusion wasn't what worried me. What really worried me at the moment was the condition of my real body. If this was an illusion, what was actually happening to my real body? That said, how am I supposed to get out of this situation? Illusions dealt with the mind, meaning that all the skills I learned except for 2 were useless to me. Use Monarch Indifference. If you want strength, use Monarch's Indifference. So far, you've only used a small fraction of its powers. However, don't get ahead of yourself. You are still not out of the waters just yet. Faint recollections of a conversation I had a while ago started to replay inside my mind. Did you predict this? Was this what you meant when you said those words? Swoosh. Out of nowhere, the scenery around me started to change. Caught off guard, I stood up from my spot. It was then that I realized. It's starting. The real illusion was starting. Jet black hair, deep blue eyes, and a height that was around 178 centimeters. New novel understandings are published here. Allworld.com. Rendover. That was the name of the human that made her suffer a humiliating defeat in the past. He was also the man that had changed her life, and someone that Angelica couldn't quite describe in words. Going from a Baron-ranked demon all the way to a Count-ranked demon in the span of a couple of years. An achievement that she wouldn't have been able to accomplish had it not been for him. She could still visibly recall the moment when he promised her that he would help her grow stronger. She didn't really believe him in the past, but circumstances forced her to sign the contract. Who would have known that he would have managed to keep the promise? In fact, he had even exceeded her expectations by quite a large margin. What shocked Angelica the most was not his strength that soared like a meteor, nor the elaborate schemes he would come up with from time to time, but it was his knowledge. A knowledge so vast about the world that even shocked her. On such example of such knowledge was the current circumstance. How was he able to tell that the demons were residing inside of this dungeon? Furthermore, he also seemed to know exactly what they were planning. This wasn't something someone like Rin should have known. It just didn't make sense to Angelica. But there was something that even he didn't know about her. Bang! A bright dark purple light flashed, illuminating a dark hall for a split second. What accompanied it was a loud explosion. Cough, cough. Stumbling a couple of steps, Angelica's hair scattered all over her face. And her chest heaved up and down unevenly. We've been looking for you all over the place, but we didn't think you would actually come to us. A sinister voice echoed throughout the large and majestic hall of the castle. By the side of the hall stood 6 black pillars that dimly lit the surroundings through a series of torches attached to their bodies. Coming out from the shadows was a black humanoid figure with long black hair that cascaded down his shoulders. He wore formal attire reminiscent of the Victorian era's clothing with a black top hat on his head, appearing close to the embodiment of elegance. An eye-catching appearance that left a powerful impact on whoever looked at him. On both hands he wore white gloves as a calm and noble aura filled with dignity spread out from his body. With his eyes locked on Angelica, the edges of his lips curled upwards. "Young miss, your mother is looking all over the place for you. I think it's about time you return to the main clan." "Pie mother." "You heard correctly." Clenching her teeth, Angelica bit her lips. Recomposing herself and throwing her hair back, she shook her head. "That isn't possible." The face of the demon before Angelica changed a little. The smile on his face lessened and his eyes grew more sinister. This only happened for a split moment, however, as he quickly returned to his usual expression. Turning his head, the demon's eyes locked on a figure in the distance. Is it because of him? The figure was none other than Ren. He was currently immobile with his eyes closed. Surrounding him were 2 other demons that were in a similar state. The aura of the 2 demons surrounding Ren was around rank, signifying that they were both count-ranked demons. Fortunately, it didn't seem as though they could attack him. "Is he the reason why you aren't returning to the main clan? Or are you afraid of the consequences that you're?" the demon in front of Angelica asked. Angelica frowned. She then coldly spat. "Think whatever you like." "Oh." The demon laughed a little. A terrifying pressure came out of his body, forcing Angelica to take a step back. Angelica's countenance slowly started to change as graveness flashed across her eyes. "Count Nubulus," she muttered underneath her breath. Once her words faded, the pressure coming out from the demon came to a stop. Surprise flashed across his face. "So you still remember me?" "Yes." Angelica slowly nodded her head. Of course she knew him. How could she not know him? He was one of her guards back when she used to live in the main clan. The Lust clan. Despite having risen so much in strength, Angelica still didn't think she could face him head-on. Especially since he was on the verge of breaking through to Marquis rank. She knew that she was not his match. Raising his hand to adjust his gloves, Count Nebulous started to speak. His demeanor was a lot more friendly than before. "It's been a while since we've last seen each other, young miss." He paused and scanned Angelica's body up and down. With a look filled with satisfaction, he started to nod his head. "But if I do have to say so myself, you've grown up beautifully. Not only that, but from the fact alone that you've managed to reach count rank, it is safe to assume that you've inherited your mother's genes." There was genuine happiness in his voice. The same couldn't be said for Angelica, who glared in his direction. "Don't mention her." "Oh my." Count Nubulus made a troubled look. "Are you still angry at the fact that your mother sent you to a small sub-branch?" Raising his head, Count Nebulous removed the top hat from his head. "Young miss, you have to understand that the reason she did that isn't because she hates you, but because of your failure in completing the mission that we've assigned to you. We spent a lot of resources trying to help you, give you the opening back then, yet you failed." Count Nebulous paused. For a split second, Angelica felt his voice become extremely sinister and cold. "You needed to be punished for it." Gulp. Angelica unknowingly swallowed a mouth of saliva as she faltered a little. This did not go unnoticed by Count Nebulous, who continued. "I was originally very disappointed by your disappearance. So was your mother. However, from the looks of things, it seems as though I may have been overthinking a little. For you to reach such strength in such little time, I'm impressed." Bending down on one knee and placing the top hat beside him, Count Nubulus took his glove off, revealing his hand that seemed to have been made out of jade, and extended it in Angelica's direction. "Young miss, no, your excellency, would you do me the honors of coming back to the main clan?" "Ah." Angelica's body froze. Staring at the hand that was reaching out for her, Angelica felt a mixture of different emotions rise from deep within her. But out of all the emotions, the one that was the most prevalent was sadness. Acceptance. This _content is taken from lworld.com. This was something that Angelica craved ever since young. She wanted to be accepted by her mother, a figure that she'd only looked up to in the past. Someone that Angelica wanted to be. But that was the past. After everything that happened to her, she no longer felt the same sense of attachment and worship that she had for her mother. Angelica held no ill feelings toward her mother for throwing her away in the past, but that didn't mean that she held any good feelings toward her as well. Now that she was fully grown up, Angelica realized just how the world worked. And it was because of this that she realized how lucky she was to have met Ren. Someone who did not treat her as an expendable that would throw her away the moment they made a mistake. Therefore, lowering her head and gazing at Count Nebulus's hand that was reaching out for her, she shook her head. I'm sorry, but I cannot. You can't. Count Nebulus raised his head in shock. Lowering his hand, his previous gentlemanly demeanor started to crumble. Did I hear incorrectly? Did you just reject me? Yes. Angelica nodded his head. This time a lot more firmly. Picking up the top hat from the ground and placing it back on his head, Count Nebulus slowly stood up. His face twisted sinisterly. Clearly, he still couldn't comprehend Angelica's decision. I don't understand. He muttered softly. Meeting Angelica's gaze, he asked. Why did you reject my offer? You don't need to know. Angelica replied in a cold tone. Count Nebulus's eyes grew sharp. I understand. Nodding his head, he slowly came to terms with the situation. Turning his head to face the human in the distance, he asked. As long as I get rid of him, you will come back, right? Angelica's eyes opened. She quickly shouted. No. But it was already too late. By the time Angelica reacted, Count Nebulus was already upon Ren. Raising his hand, his nails elongated and became sharp. Without a second thought, he swiped at Ren. He did not hold back in his attack, as the energy contained in his attack was enough to cause the room to shake. Die! He shouted in a bloodthirsty manner. But it was then that something incredibly shocking happened. Right as the claw was about to reach Ren, the atmosphere froze altogether. Be it the demons inside of the hall, Count Nebulus or Angelica. No one moved. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but they couldn't. Before anyone could figure out what was going on, Ren's hair slowly started to change. They slowly started to become white. Chapter 498. Has the illusion started? It was the only conclusion I could make as I gazed into the distance. Carnage. If I had to describe what I was seeing in one word, it would be carnage. Large cracks scattered throughout the scarlet-dyed sky. Coming out of them was a sea of creatures, all pushing each other, hungrily goggling at what was beneath them with an insatiable and malicious look. Buildings started to crumble as screams echoed everywhere. The blaring and irritating sound of the sirens became drowned out by the frightening explosions that were happening around the city. What's going on? Staring at the scene from the top of the building, I was left at a loss for words. An acrid smell permeated the area around me. In the end, I managed to murmur. This place looks familiar. I had definitely seen this place before. But because of its current state, I found it hard to tell where exactly it was. Taking my eyes away from the city, I waved my hand in the air and realized that the temperature around me was scorchingly hot. Sweat trickled down the side of my face and breathing started to become more difficult for me. What a powerful illusion, I thought. Clenching and unclenching my fists, I was left shocked by how realistic everything around me felt. The thing that shocked me the most about the illusion was the fact that I could feel all my senses. From my sense of touch, smell, sight, hearing, and taste. Everything around me felt exactly as it did in the real world. Whew. Fixing my gaze on the city below, I took a deep breath to clear my mind. All right. Once my mind was cleared, I took a step forward and my clothes and hair fluttered upwards. Reaching my ears was a loud rush of wind, similar to the static from blowing into a microphone, which was also accompanied by a paper-like sound coming from my fluttering clothes. Bang! Crashing against the groups, fine miniature crevices formed on the area beneath my feet. Brushing my clothes off, I took a look at my surroundings. How odd. People continued running around the city, desperately trying to cling to survival. Yet no one seemed to have managed to notice my appearance. It was then that I noticed a male with a short build running my way. Watch out, I warned. Despite my words, the man continued to run. I became alarmed. Can't he see me? Huh. The answer to my question was soon answered. A split second after my words faded, the male passed through my body. As he passed my body, I turned my head to look at his disappearing back before I looked at my hands. Lowering my body, I touched the ground. feeling the rough and granulated road, my brows slowly knit together. Slowly I came to a conclusion. I can only touch things that are non-living. To test this theory, I walked up to another pedestrian running, and just like the first time, he directly ran through my body. This confirmed my theory. I couldn't touch living beings. Where am I? Though odd, I decided to concern myself with other things. Looking around me, I tried to get a better idea of where I was. For a second I almost forgot that I was inside of an illusion. It was then that I noticed something. Carefully moving through the debris that littered the streets, I arrived at a small intersection. This place. Avenue Street 17N. It was the name of a street that wasn't too far from my house. The one I used to live in before Amanda moved my parents. Curious, I decided to have a look. At the moment I was still unclear about what the goal of the illusion was about, but I could tell that time here was slower than in reality. The real goal of going to my old house was to figure out if there were any irregularities with this world. Since I didn't have any clue regarding how to get out of this illusion, this was all I could do. And I couldn't really explain it. But I felt this odd, inexplicable feeling inside of me that told me to go there. I grew more alert when I realized this. Was this part of the illusion? It's been a while since I've been here. It took me around 5 minutes to reach my old house, and when I gazed at it from beneath the footsteps, I felt a small part of me stir. I may have not spent a lot of time in this house, but it still felt nostalgic to me. If there was one thing that was different about this house than the one inside of my memories, it was the fact that a part of it was damaged. Still, the damage wasn't to an extensive degree. What am I doing? Bitterly shaking my hand, I moved up the stairs and grabbed onto the metal handle of the door. Feeling the cool sensation of the knob, I twisted it and opened the door. Click. The same homey scent of the past. The same wall that was littered with pictures of me and my family. Without a doubt, this place was home. Creak, creak. Taking a step forward, the wooden floor started to creak beneath my feet. This was typical of an old house. Especially one that seemed to have gone through rough times. It's the same. Staring at the pictures on the walls, I realized that everything was the same as the last time I had seen them. The house was a bit worn out and the windows were broken, but it was the same as it was in the past. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Strange. How were the demons able to create such detailed illusion? Cage. It was then that I heard a muffled sobbing sound coming from the distance. My head immediately snapped in that direction. Who? I instantly became alarmed. Was this part of the illusion? Raising the heels of my foot, I tiptoed my way toward where the sobbing sound was coming from. I wanted to be as quiet as possible. Not sure if this was a good idea or not. Stopping right before the door frame that led to the living room, I carefully tilted my body to catch a glimpse of what was happening. What? My body stiffened. Catching a glimpse of what was behind the door frame, my body stopped moving. It's Nola. A frail and weak voice rang throughout the empty house. Sitting on his knees behind 3 familiar figures, a figure hunched over their bodies and wept uncontrollably. His body continuously trembled, and though hidden, his complexion looked especially pale and skinny. It was clear that the figure had been mourning for more than a day. The scene looked truly heart-wrenching. This is all an illusion. I, of course, managed to recognize the sobbing individual. Who could it be but me? Biting my lips, I turned my head. Despite the fact that I knew that this was all an illusion, the images of my family lying down on the ground dead kept replaying inside of my mind. A sharp and inexplicable pain coursed through my heart, forcing me to look away. Fuck. I eventually swore. Clenching my teeth and fists, I calmed myself down. Get a hold of yourself. You're doing exactly what the demons want. As if I'd let them. Slap. Slapping my face, I dispelled all distracting thoughts from my mind. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes and proceeded to walk over my hunched-up figure. After deliberating for a bit, I came to a conclusion. Since this is an illusion that is probably targeting my weak points, I should get rid of them in order to free myself. Extending my hand, a sword materialized on my palm. Firmly gripping the sword, I slowly started to unsheath it. Once I unsheathed the sword, I stared at its sharp and glistening body, which I could see my reflection in. Staring at my reflection on the sword, I raised my sword. Whew. I took another breath. Exhaling slowly, I gradually flexed my muscles and prepared to slash down. Hold on. Coming to a halt, I felt a hand grasp my shoulder. Whining. Out of pure reflex, I rapidly twisted my waist and slashed in the direction of where the voice came from. But as I slashed down, my sword was met with no resistance as it simply slashed the air. Wow! A surprised voice rang out. Raising my head, my eyes soon met with a figure I was all too familiar with. Unexpectedly, despite having just slashed at me, the figure's attention was not drawn to me, but to the illusionary version of myself. "What do you feel?" he asked. His voice was the same as it always was. Emotionless and cold. My brows furrowed. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb," I asked. Raising his hand, he pointed his finger in the direction of the illusionary version of myself. "What do you think about what you're seeing? Do you feel anything at all?" "I don't." "Oh." The other entity smiled. "I don't believe you." Before I had a chance to speak, he took a step forward and suddenly pressed his palm on my back. "How about you try feeling it for yourself?" Wah. Before I even had the chance to reply, the world around me warped and my consciousness slipped. Pain. An immeasurable pain that I couldn't describe consumed my entire body. It was a different type of pain. One that was drastically different from the times I almost had my soul incinerated and my body burned to bits and experimented on. It hit different, but it was a pain that I never wished anyone would bear. I found it hard to even breathe. I couldn't quite open my mouth. Every action, be it breathing, thinking, or anything that required energy, seemed strenuous at the moment. Slowly, I placed my hand over my heart and clenched my clothes. "It hurts." Opening my eyes, the faces of my parents, devoid of any sign of life, appeared in my vision. The pain intensified. Hiya! I let out a heart-wrenching cry. It was overwhelming. I wished for it to stop. Amidst my cries, a voice echoed from behind me. "It hurts, doesn't it?" I wanted to reply, but I couldn't. I could feel tears drip down from the side of my cheeks. Regardless, he continued to speak. "Losing the people you love so dearly hurts, doesn't it?" Where was he getting at? His enigmatic way of speaking irritated me. How would you feel if you felt the same pain you're experiencing now, over and over again? In an endless cycle that will never stop. I slowly turned my head before finally getting a better look at the other entity. It was then that I noticed it. The other entity that I was all too familiar with looked at me with a smile on his face. But his smile. The smile on his face. It wasn't normal. No, it was a heart-wrenching smile. A smile that seemed to tell millions of words with just a single glance. Ah. I was finally able to open my mouth. Stumbling back a bit, my eyes changed. "It can't be." The smile on the other figure lessened a little. With his eyes lowered, he opened his mouth. "The pain you're experiencing. It's something I'm all too familiar with. It's something that I cannot get rid of regardless of much I try to. But..." He paused. Raising his head, our eyes finally met. "Unlike you, I experience this type of pain at a much higher level. Imagine watching your family die over and over again and you can't do anything about it. No matter how many times you try to change the inevitable future, something happens and forces you to experience the same pain again. And again. And again. And again. And again." His every word deeply resounded inside of my head. I could feel the sadness and detachment in his voice. Somehow, it deeply resonated with something inside of me. Something that I wanted to reject with my whole being. At one point, when one experiences such pain over and over again, what do you think will happen to that person? Stop it. Do you think they can move on? Move on and continue undergoing this endless cycle of torture, like nothing ever happened to them? Stop it, damn it. Or do you think that they will inevitably start to lose all the traits that made them human? Lose a part of themselves? And only start to think about getting out of this endless cycle, even if it means sacrificing what they once held dear in the past? Stop fucking speaking. When pushed to the limit, death looks like the most comforting place one wants to be. I endlessly shouted inside of my mind, but deep down I knew. I knew exactly what the figure was trying to hint at. "Rin, do you know why I always say that I'm not your enemy?" I didn't reply. Inside I already knew the answer. "It's because I am you." Kate. I let out a muffled sound. I felt my body weaken and my head went blank. I couldn't understand anything anymore. The figure who I had thought to be my enemy and whom I thought was trying to kill me at every chance he got was actually me? How did that make sense? I wanted to deny it, but thinking about the past, everything was slowly starting to make sense. A blurry picture started to form inside of my mind. Turning around, I looked back at my parents. Imagine watching your family die over and over again and you can't do anything about it. We are cursed. Slowly the pieces started to fall into place and the picture started to become more and more vivid. Jim, it looks like we don't have much time. If this keeps going, you're going to die. Lowering his body and hooking his arm around my neck, I heard his whisper in my ear. In front of me, a small screen materialized. Displayed on it was my figure, and the opposite of me was another figure speedily heading in my direction. It was then that I understood something. If I didn't do anything now, I was dead. I've said this before. His words were soft, but never before did they ring as powerfully in my head as they did now. Use Monarch's indifference. Chapter 499. Are you afraid that I will take over your body? His soft voice continued to ring inside of my head. Don't worry. Plike. I heard a familiar rattling sound. Even if I wanted to take over your body with these chains binding me, there's no way for me to do that. Plike. Pulling his arm, the rattling stopped and a loud metallic ring echoed through the air. As you can see, no matter what I do, I will always be bound by the chains. I can't take over your body even if I wanted it to. I wanted to deny his words, but I knew. I knew that he was telling the truth. I couldn't explain it, but I could tell that he wasn't lying about this. Was it because he was me? Or was this another mind trick? I no longer could tell. You can choose to not believe me, but you don't have time. I gazed at the projection. He was right. I didn't have much time. Staring at the demon that was fast approaching me with his sharp nails aimed at my head, I knew that it was only a matter of seconds now. Use it. Ren urged. His voice lowered into a whisper. Use Monarch's indifference. See it for yourself. Your true strength. Closing my eyes, I bit the bottom of my lips. Opening them again and staring at the nail that was only now a couple of inches away from my face. My head began to lower. Opening my mouth, I muttered. Monarch's indifference. The world warped and the scenery changed. Without even realizing it, I found myself inside the hull of the castle. I then turned my head and found everything around me revolved in slow motion. Eyes of Kronos. I realized that my skill was turned on. Not only that, but so was the one. All of my skills were activated. But most surprising was the fact that I could move in this slowed-down reality. It was an odd and inexplicable sensation that I couldn't describe in words. My emotions. They were numb. I couldn't feel anything. But unlike in the past, I felt in control. It no longer felt like someone was controlling me. I was the one in control this time, not the other me. I then raised my finger and time warped. Cling. Impossible. A startled and terrified voice reached my ears. My eyes slowly blinked. Turning my head to gaze at my finger, I noticed the sharp nail, reminiscent of a sharp sword, clinging onto it. A powerful wave of demonic energy veiled the body of the nail. The pressure that was coming out of it was terrifying. Or at least it was supposed to. Meeting his gaze, the only words I could mutter were, New novel understances are published here. lworld.com. You're weak. I then waved my hand. Bang. Like swatting a mosquito, the demon's body crashed against one of the pillars in the castle. Kawawa. His agonized scream echoed throughout the place. At the same time, levitating atop an open palm was a luminous orb of light that pulsated in an odd manner. With each throb, the ball of light would release thick and powerful undulations of energy in the air. The sheer energy contained within that small orb made one tremble with just a look. Planetary seed. A thick and majestic voice echoed in the air, as two scarlet blood eyes gazed in the direction of the orb. The key to his strength. Without it, he would have never been able to become as strong as he currently was. Closing his eyes to conceal his two scarlet blood eyes, the Demon King softly brought his hand toward his mouth and consumed the ball of light. It was at the exact moment that he swallowed the planetary seed that the area around him started to tremble. Rumble. Rumble. A surge of majestic energy began to spring out from the Demon King's body, extending around the area he was in. The shaking amplified as a result. But the Demon King remained unfazed. With his eyes closed, a white hue began to circle around his body, covering it like a soft blanket. Ha! Opening his mouth, turbid air began to escape from his mouth and the shaking stopped. Opening his eyes, his two scarlet red eyes shone for a brief moment. Bang! With a thunderous noise, the area in front of him exploded into bits. Gazing at the area, the Demon King shook his head in dissatisfaction. Not quite there yet. Drumming his fingers over the armrest of the throne, the Demon King rested his cheek on the other hand which was propped up by the other armrest. It was then that the Demon King felt something. Raising his head, the Demon King's eyes became sharp. Closing his eyes for a short moment, he opened them up again and his lips curled upwards. So you've awakened. He then swiped his hand and a fissure formed in the space in front of me. Overwhelming fear. A sensation that was so dreadful that it made one feel insignificant. Count Nebulus had only ever felt this type of emotion once in his life, and it was back when he met the Demon King for the first time in his life. That was the day he understood what true fear was. A glance. That was all it took for him to choke on the spot and almost pass out. Just a single glance. He felt his dignity, elegance, and everything that made him who he was stripped away from him. He thought that he would never experience such feelings again in his life. Yet. Why is it happening again? Two dull gray eyes. Eyes that seemed to look down on everything from a faraway and unreachable peak. The color of their eyes was different, but the feeling was the same. Dread. Absolute dread. That was all Count Nebulus felt at the moment. Bang. He didn't know when. But his vision blacked out for a split moment of time and he found his body crashing against one of the pillars of the castle. Kawawa. In the end, that was all he was able to force out of his mouth. A radiating and pulsating pain coursed through his back, forcing the air out of his body. Stumbling down on the ground with both knees and hands on the ground, his top hat fell in front of him. What's going on? Count Nebulus was unable to process what was happening. Everything happened fast. Too fast for him to properly understand what had happened. He slowly raised his head. Ah. He made a weak sound. The clear and regular sound of footsteps echoed out. Count Nebulus watched. He watched as the white-haired figure stopped in front of his two other clan members that were paralyzed on the spot. They had the same petrified and terrified look on their faces. He could see their legs shaking. It was clear that they wanted to run away but they couldn't. Without any prior warning, the white-haired figure raised both of his hands. No. Count Nebulus screamed, but it was too late. Pressing his fingers on the forehead of each of the two demons, Count Nebulus watched as their eyes slowly turned white and their figures started to disintegrate in the air, scattering like fine dust. With just a simple touch of his finger, two Count-rank demons died just like that. How was that possible? How could the human that looked to be a little weaker than he was so strong? Regret started to kick in. I should have killed him first. He thought that he was of no threat, but he was wrong. He was the real threat. It was from that point on that Count Nebulus lost all of his will to fight. I can't win. New novel underthings are published here. lworld.com. He slowly started to accept his incoming death. His prior feelings of dread weren't a fruit of his imagination. They were real. But, contrary to his expectations, the white-haired figure ignored him and proceeded to walk toward the very end of the room, in the direction of a long flight of stairs blanketed in a carpet of red. Count Nebulus watched as he slowly walked up the stairs in a slow and steady manner. The carpade may have been able to drown out the tapping sound that arose with each footstep he took, but to Count Nebulus each footstep he took still powerfully echoed inside of his head. Stopping in front of a machine, the white-haired figure once again extended his hand and touched it. A similar scene began to play out. Scattering like fine dust, the machine disintegrated into thin air. His white hair fluttered as a gentle wind suddenly blew, carrying the dust away. Is this my chance? Staring at the exposed back of the white-haired figure for a split second, Count Nebulus felt tempted to attack. But before such thoughts could even develop into something concrete, the white-haired figure spoke up. Come out. His detached voice echoed throughout the hall. Come out. Confused, Count Nebulus looked around. Was there someone else here? He didn't have to wait for long to get an answer to that question. The air suddenly started to tremble and the space around them started to distort. Zir. Crack. A sound akin to that of glass shattering spread out through the hall as the fine miniature lines formed in the air. But that was not all. Crash. Split second after the crack formed in the air with a loud crashing noise, a pale white hand reached out from behind the crack. Grasping on the side of the air, the arm pulled the air apart, expanding the crack even further. It wasn't long before a space that was the size of a regular person formed, and a foot reached out from behind the crack. The foot slowly touched the ground, but to Count Nebulous, it felt like 1,000 thunderbolts had struck inside of his head at the same time. His body swayed as a result. What is happening? He wondered as he looked up ahead with even more dread. He wasn't the only one that felt this way, as from the corner of his eyes he saw Angelica stumble a couple of steps. She was only able to remain standing thanks to the aid of one of the pillars of the hall. Stepping out from the void was a figure with white hair and scarlet-red eyes, wearing a thick black armor that spiked at the ends of the shoulders and released a mystifying pressure that enshrouded the entire hall. A figure that resembled a human walked out. It can't be. With his eyes fixed on the figure in the distance, Count Nebulous found it hard to breathe or even raise his head as it subconsciously lowered. No matter how much he wanted to raise it, he couldn't. There was this tangible and invisible pressure that prevented him from doing so. He then started to lower his body in a prostrating manner. Despite his incredible pride, Count Nebulous couldn't bring himself to raise his body. His blood shook and he weakly turned his head to get a look at what was happening. That was when he saw it. Two figures standing on the opposite ends. A set of red eyes and a set of blue eyes. Both stared at each other without saying a single word. From that point on, time seemed to have stopped. Chapter 500. Throughout his life and experiences, the Demon King found himself asking 3 questions. Why does the world reject my existence? What is the meaning of my life? Who am I? He was born a demon. A race that needed to conquer planets in order to survive. They didn't really have a choice. In order to survive, demons needed demonic energy, and that could only be created through the conversion of the mana in the air. That said, there were only 2 things that the Demon King remembered about his childhood. His name, Jezebeth, and the fact that his race was universally hunted down by all the other races in the universe. Everyone tended to call them a race that held no emotions, but this was far from the truth. Demons were no different from the other races. It was true that they were a lot wilder than some of the other races, but that didn't mean that they were evil and had no emotions. Evil was a subjective word. There were always 2 sides to the same coin, and everyone seemed to have failed to realize this. From a young age, Jezebeth never remembered staying in a single place at once. Destruction, death, carnage. Those were the only things he saw as he ran from planet to planet, trying to avoid being hunted down by the hands of the Alliance. Despite that, his scenery never changed. He would always see death wherever he went. But it wasn't the death of the inhabitants of the planet they were moving into. No, it was the death of his own race as they were mercilessly slaughtered down by the other races. Parasites. God's mistake. Why were you ever created? What purpose do you serve to this world? Wherever he went, he would repeatedly hear the same words being thrown at him. Listening to the same insults over and over again, at one point he started to question himself. Why does the world reject my existence? That was when the first question arose. Why did the world seem to reject his very existence to the core? What wrong did he ever commit? He had only been trying to survive. Weren't the other races doing the same? Weren't they also killing livestock in order to feed themselves? What was so wrong with what they were doing? This happened back when he was still young. Skip a few years. Nothing changed. As he aimlessly ran from planet to planet in order to ensure his survival, the scenery that he saw since young never changed. Destruction. Death. Carnage. It was always the same scene. At some point he had gotten used to the scene. But it was also when he got used to the scene that stopped and looked around himself for once. It was from that moment that he realized something. He was alone. All of his family, friends, and demons that he had known throughout his years had long been killed, leaving him alone. The only memento he had of his parents was a small black box that rested on his neck. He didn't know what it was exactly, but his parents told him to never let go of it and to put his demon core inside of it. He was still young and thus he obediently accepted their suggestion. He didn't know much, but supposedly the box was very durable and it could help him survive. At least that was what his parents told him. But as he grasped the silver box hanging on his neck and took a good long hard look at it, Jezebeth felt nothing. The box used to remind him of his times with his parents, but it no longer did. It was from that point that the second question arose. What is the meaning of my life? Was he just born to be hunted? Was this his meaning to life? Ever since young, all he had been doing is running away. Running away from the alliance that was seeking to eradicate him. He didn't remember anything else. Was this all his life really amounted to? More time passed. Throughout the years, Jezebeth kept asking himself the same two questions. Why does the world reject my existence? What is the meaning of my life? Before he knew it, many years had passed and he suddenly found himself blankly staring at the sky. Levitating in the sky like creatures of justice, and with light spreading out from behind them, a dozen or so figures stared at him from above. Slowly descending down toward his direction was a woman wearing a silver armor that shone brightly and gently wrapped around her figure. She was one of the members of the alliance that was created in order to exterminate the demons. Your race does not belong in this universe. Her crisp and melodious voice rang throughout the world. Hearing her words, something within him snapped. Your race does not belong in this universe? He had heard the same phrase over and over again. He was sick of hearing it. Why? Just why? Cough, cough. Coughing black blood down his body, Jezebeth laughed in deprecation. His blood-red eyes gazed upwards towards the dark clouds covering the sky. Hanging down his neck was a simple silver necklace. Attached to its end was a black box. It was his family memento. You're nothing but a bunch of hypocrites. He managed to utter after struggling to find his words. What did you say? Cough. Well, you speak as though we have committed some, cough, grave sin against you all. But what is so grave with us trying to survive? Knowing that his death was already set, Jezebeth no longer held back. What gives you the right to come here and judge us like you are some sort of god? He vented all his frustration at once. In the last moments of his life, he wanted to let the people that had been hunting his race down know that they were simply just a bunch of hypocrites. But it was all a futile attempt from his end. Don't blame me for doing this for the sake of our people. Like you've said, we are merely doing this for our own survival. Yo. Before he could say anything else, a bright orb descended down towards the ground. In an instant, his figure was enveloped by the orb and his consciousness slipped. He felt his body disintegrate. Before he died, he caught sight of the box on his neck. In the end, I will die without knowing the answer to my two questions. Or so he thought. He didn't know exactly what had happened, but just when he thought he had died, his eyes sprung open and he found his body floating into space. I'm alive. Turning around and gazing around him, his eyes soon paused on a floating metallic scrap beside him. Is this the reason I survived? Compared to before, the box was no longer the same. It was pretty much scraps at this point, but as Jezebeth grasped onto the box unknowingly, a tear traced down the side of his cheek. The emotions that he had long lost started to once again resurface. Why? He wondered out loud. Unfortunately, no sound came out of his mouth as he was in space. But Jezebeth didn't care. Why is this happening to me? What is the purpose of my life? Even though no sound came out, he continued to question his very own existence. He couldn't understand. He couldn't understand his purpose. Why does the world reject my existence? What is the meaning of my life? It was then that something happened. A small ball of light the size of a small rock quickly headed his way. Before Jezebeth could have enough time to react and make out what was happening, the ball landed on his body and his body arched backward. Ah! He let out an agonized scream. The pain shot up his body like a raging fire. He cringed. It exploded in his head with a blinding whiteness. It made him dizzy. It made him reel. The pain was reminiscent of having his whole body burned into bits before being regenerated and burned again. Not only that, he felt an inexplicable and sharp pain in his brain. The pain in his head was so strong that for a short moment of time he completely forgot about the other areas that were hurting as he clutched his head with both arms. Ah! He once again screamed as different images and information started to insert into his mind. All of this lasted for a split second, but to Jezebeth it felt like an eternity. Ha ha ha. Once everything was over, Jezebeth's body floated in space. His chest heaved up and down unevenly, but the pain was gone. A strange power enveloped his body. He couldn't quite explain what it was. It took a while for him to calm down. Once he did, he slowly began to open his eyes and his figure began to morph. The Akashic Records. He muttered in a soft tone. There was a lot of new information inside of his mind. Most of it was hazy, But in that information he was able to learn of the existence of a higher existence. The Akashic Records. The entity that overlooked the entire universe. And not only that, but he had also learned of something else. The bright white light that had just hit him was called a planetary seed, and it was in fact a small fragment of the Akashic Records. Sorting out the information inside his mind and realizing a lot of new things, another question emerged in Jezebeth's mind. Who am I? That was how the third question came to mind. Unlike last time, however, he had finally found hope. A way for him to get the answers he so desperately sought. Answers about his very own existence. And it was none other than through breaking the limit and reaching the Akashic Records. It was from that point on that Jezebeth became the Demon King and his curse began. Opening his eyes again, what met Jezebeth's sight were two deep blue eyes. They were a familiar set of eyes. Eyes that he had not seen in a long time. As he gazed into them from where he was standing, the edges of Jezebeth's lips curled. It's been a while. There was a time when he once thought that no one would ever understand him. A time when he thought that he was alone in the universe. But he was wrong. There was in fact someone else out there that had the same lost look in his eyes as him. Someone that the Demon King could see himself in. It was none other than the figure standing opposite of him. Or so he thought. The Demon King's forehead started to crease. He had finally noticed something. Opening his mouth, he eventually muttered. "You're not him." His voice echoed throughout the hall. Ren's head tilted a little. His demeanor remained impassive and hard to read. "Not him." "Yes." The Demon King nodded. The area around him started to fluctuate. "You may look like him, but the look in your eyes." He paused and squinted his eyes a little. He once again carefully scrutinized Ren from his option, before eventually shaking his head. "Your eyes. They feel more alive. You're not him." That lost look that was similar to his. It was gone. The person standing opposite him was not the person from his memories. He may look the same, but he wasn't him. He started to grow disappointed. Feeling the Demon King's gaze directed my way, I didn't feel anything. His pressure was enormous. Enough to make anyone cower with just a glance. You can find the rest of this content on the lworld.com platform. But to me it didn't really feel like anything special. "It looks like you've still not completely awoken yet." The Demon King mumbled to himself. His voice was extremely soft, and had it not been for my now enhanced senses, I would have been unable to hear it. His words may sound ambiguous, but I perfectly understood what he was referring to. It was the future version of me. "What exactly are you looking for?" I slowly asked. What was the sudden reason for the Demon King's appearance? Since a dungeon was a pocket dimension inside of the demon realm, I understood how he was able to show up here. But I could tell that the figure in front of me was just a clone. He was here, yet at the same time actually not here. "What am I looking for?" The Demon King raised his head. He eventually shook it. "I was looking for an old friend, but he isn't here." His voice sounded rather disappointed. Even then there was something about his sentence that threw me off. At least internally. Outwardly I kept an impassive look. "An old friend," I repeated slowly. The Demon King nodded. "You heard correctly." He raised his hand and opened his palm to face my direction. "A pity," he once again mumbled. Rumble, rumble. The room suddenly started to quake, and torrential energy sprung out from the Demon King's body, merging toward the front of his palm, creating a black sphere. The air distorted and the black sphere disappeared from its spot. It soon reappeared right in front of me. Click. With a low clicking sound, the sphere split into two, crashing behind me. Boom. Boom. Smoke filled the air and the castle started to crumble. With my eyes still locked on the Demon King, I waved my hand. "Angelica, leave now." Before she even had the chance to realize what was going on, her body was sent flying in the distance. I had no choice. With her here, I couldn't go all out. From just that single exchange I had with the Demon King, I realized just how formidable of an opponent he was. Don't get distracted in the middle of a fight. Not even a second after I sent Angelica away, a familiar face appeared in front of me. It all happened so fast. Without even giving me the chance to react, I felt something press against my abdomen and my view distorted. Before I knew it, I found myself being flung in the air, and the castle I was previously in became a small black dot. Poochie. A red trail of blood followed my movement. Closing my eyes, I twisted my body and unsheathed my sword and swung it toward my right. Clay. A powerful ring reverberated throughout the air, dispersing the ashen gray clouds in the air. Opening my eyes again, I found the Demon King holding onto my sword with just his bare fingers. I was left shocked by this. Only internally though. Outwardly, I didn't show it as my face refused to change. Prick, prick, crack. What followed after that was the sound of something cracking. I didn't need to raise my head to realize what was happening. The dungeon was about to break. My energy combined with the Demon King's was simply far too much for the dungeon to hold. It was then that I suddenly heard a faint whisper in my right ear. Your movements, they're not as polished as his. His voice grew even more disappointed. By the time I was able to process his words, something pressed against my back and my vision warped. Bang! Crashing against the ground, my vision turned black. I didn't even have the time to groan. A familiar iron taste clung to the back of my throat, but I held it in by swallowing. A crunchy and regular sound of footsteps echoed out. Raising my head, I stared at the Demon King in the distance. Kish! With a low groan, I placed my hand on my knee and supported my body up. For a brief moment of time, neither one of us spoke. Disappointing. But the silence was inevitably broken by the Demon King. Shaking his head, he continued. You're weak. So much so that I'm starting to doubt whether you are him or not. Without saying anything, I just listened. And here I thought I could finally appease my curiosity. Did I waste this much energy to test an incomplete version of yourself? Taking a deep breath, I softly mumbled. Sorry. Sorry. The Demon King repeated. The air around him started to stir and I could feel his anger reach out to me. Did you? Don't misunderstand. I cut him off and finally stood up. You see. Raising my hand, I brushed my hair back and gazed at the Demon King. I'm still quite unfamiliar with this new power of mine. You were also right about me lacking experience, but... Visit lworld.com for a better reading experience. Staring at my hands, I clenched and unclenched my fists. This power. I couldn't really explain what it was and where it originated from, but it wasn't something the current me could fully control. I needed time. Time to properly get used to it. I'm slowly starting to get the hang of this. My body was slowly getting accustomed to this. So bear with it until I get used to it. Taking a step forward, my vision distorted and I appeared a couple of meters behind the Demon King. Click. What followed my appearance was a low clicking sound as a white line formed in the air. The Demon King's figure blurred and he reappeared a couple of meters ahead of me. Drip, drip, drip. Raising his thumb and tracing it over his cheek, the Demon King lowered his head and looked at his thumb. He smiled. Interesting. Raising his hand and opening up his palm, he pressed it down. Crack. A large fissure formed in the sky, and a gigantic black palm the size of the castle from before came smashing down in my direction with unprecedented speed and power. Blinking my eyes once, I remained standing where I was. Crash. Lifting my head up to gaze at the palm that was headed my way, my ears picked up a glass-shattering sound that echoed throughout the world as the palm headed my way. In a fraction of a second, the palm was upon me. The closer it came to me, the slower time became for me. Blinking once more, I raised my hand and tapped the air with my index finger. Time warped and before I knew it, my finger was touching the middle of the palm, freezing it in place. A horrifying energy started to circulate out from the point of contact between my finger and the palm in the air. Golden circles started to spread out, and the glass-shattering sound became even more frequent. Prick, prick, prick. This persisted for a good couple of seconds before I lowered my hand and turned my head toward my right. Once I turned, the palm in the air turned into a fine black powder that scattered in the air. A fierce wind blew and my hair scattered all over my face. On the other side, the same thing happened with the Demon King as he directly gazed at me with renowned interest. With my right hand next to my face, I slowly clenched my hand into a fist. Rumble. Rumble. The area around me started to distort and the ground fiercely shook. Placing my hand on the sheath of my sword, like a vacuum, the mana in the air started to agglomerate in my direction. Positioning my body forward, my thumb pressed the hilt of my sword. Prick, prick, prick. Cracks started to form around the area the Demon King was standing on. Click. A familiar clicking sound rang in the air and a glass-shattering sound rang throughout the air. Replacing the cracks were a series of fissures where bright white lights shot out at tremendous speeds. Furthermore, the number of attacks couldn't be counted with one hand. If I had to make an estimate, they numbered over 100. Responding to the sudden attack, the Demon King simply waved his hand. All the lights around him scattered, turning into bright white light particles. But because the attacks were endless, he was forced to fend them off. I took advantage of this and lightly pressed my foot on the ground before me. My vision warped, and the palm of my hand pressed onto the Demon King's face. Crash. With a loud crashing sound, I smashed the Demon King's face toward the ground. The ground started to shake and a series of large pieces of rock the size of a regular car flew into the air. With my hand still pressed onto his face, I clenched it tightly and raised his head before smashing it again against the ground. Bang! Once again pieces of rock were sent flying in the air as the crater we were in deepened. Unsatisfied, I repeated. Bang! With each smash, the pit around me enlarged and deepened. Bang! Bang! Had it been the me of the past, I would have probably have shouted something to vent out my emotions, but at the moment as I smashed the Demon King's head against the hard ground, I felt empty. I didn't really feel anything. The same could be said for the Demon King, who continued to stare at me through the gaps of my fingers with his scarlet red eyes. Raising my hand one more time, I prepared to smash it one more time, but I soon stopped. Eventually I let go of his head. "Why aren't you fighting back?" I asked. I didn't realize it at first, but it only became clear to me a few moments ago that the Demon King has not been fighting back. Because there is no point. Standing up, the Demon King patted his armor. He wasn't exactly in the best of shapes as his figure was slowly starting to turn transparent. Staring at him from my spot, I moved my hand behind my back. Following that, my hand started to twitch uncontrollably. I was at my limit. I don't see the need to fight against someone who has still not fully awakened yet. You may have gained a fraction of your former power, but you still haven't made it yours. He turned his body away from me. Not only that, but I didn't come here to fight you in the first place. I just wanted to check if you had awoken. Extending his hand forward, the Demon King grasped the air and pulled away, creating a small black fissure. That said, he slowly took a step into the fissure. "You're not half bad. We'll meet again soon enough. Once you've fully awakened." Those were the last words he managed to say before his figure completely entered the fissure and he disappeared. Silence enveloped the surroundings. Prick, prick, prick. Amidst the silence, the resilient sound of something cracking continued to echo throughout the whole dungeon. Crash. What followed after it was a loud crashing sound and the dungeon collapsed. /N We've done it. Chapter 500. As a man who keeps his word. The novel shall end here. I'm kidding. Thank you very much for reaching this incredible milestone with me. To celebrate it, I made the chapter about double the size of a regular one. I'm incredibly grateful for all of your support. Thank you again.